Most relationships don't die from lack of love, but from what stays unspoken in the silence of intimacy, the quiet war between longing and fear that neither dares to name. Carl Jung.
There are marriages that end not because of betrayal or distance, but because of something far quieter, the slow erosion of intimacy. Two people can still share a house, a bed, even a routine, yet feel oceans apart. They talk about bills, children, and plans, but not about what happens in the silence between them. Many relationships collapse not from lack of love, but from the unspoken frustrations that arise in intimacy, the place where vulnerability meets ego, where desire is tested, and where misunderstanding can quietly grow into resentment. In today's conversation, we explore the 5 things men quietly struggle with in physical and emotional intimacy and wish women would stop doing. But this is not a conversation about behavior or fault. It is an exploration through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology, revealing how hidden fears, archetypes, and unconscious patterns shape what men truly feel, crave, and often cannot express in words. Many women misread this silence as disinterest, but Jung would call it the whisper of the unconscious. Behind every man's complaint lies not rejection, but fear, the fear of emotional exposure, fear of judgment, fear of losing trust. And behind every woman's frustration lies the same yearning, to be seen, to be chosen, to be met at the same depth of soul. If you enjoy reflections like this, please like the video, subscribe to Jungian Mindshift, and join our community where self-knowledge begins the journey to real love. Let us begin with the first one, the quiet pressure that destroys more closeness than any other.
1. Focus. It begins so quietly that even he doesn't notice it. A shift in the air, a sudden stillness inside him. The noise of the world fades, and his awareness narrows until everything beyond her becomes background. This is what the narrator calls the first sign, focus. When a man's body and psyche align in attraction, his senses sharpen. Not because he chooses to, but because something ancient inside him begins to awaken. His eyes soften, then dart away as if afraid to reveal too much. His body angles slightly toward her, mirroring her posture without thought. He becomes fully present, as though her existence has condensed time itself. To an outside observer, it may seem ordinary. A look, a pause, a breath. But to the man, this is instinct meeting consciousness. Focus is not simply attention. It is the psyche's way of saying, this matters. In that moment, the unconscious takes command of perception. Jung would call this the stirring of an archetype, an activation of the masculine principle seeking union with the feminine. Modern psychology has described this phenomenon as selective attention bias. When a person experiences desire or emotional arousal, the brain's reward system floods with dopamine, prioritizing whatever stimulates that response. But Jung went further. He believed such focus was not only biological, but symbolic. The psyche attempting to connect with what it perceives as missing within. The man's gaze, in Jungian terms, is not just looking at her. It is searching for something within himself reflected in her presence. When a man's attention locks in this way, it is both beautiful and fragile, because behind that focus lies a subtle fear, the fear of losing control. He wants to remain composed, but the unconscious has already begun to blur the line between perception and projection. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The same applies to attraction. Everything that draws us is often an echo of what we long to integrate. The woman becomes a mirror for his anima, the inner feminine that he has yet to fully understand. This is why focus can feel magnetic, but also unsettling. It's not just sexual attraction, it's the psyche recognizing something it has been missing. A man's gaze lingers not only on beauty, but on the symbolic, the tone of her voice, the calm in her presence, the softness that his own life may have hardened. Through her, he momentarily glimpses the possibility of wholeness. But this focus can also turn into distortion if left unconscious. When a man projects his inner ideal onto a woman, he stops seeing her and begins seeing his fantasy, the perfect nurturer, the muse, the savior. This is the danger of what Jung called anima possession. The woman becomes burdened with an image she never agreed to carry, and when she inevitably fails to match the projection, disillusionment follows. The same focus that once felt like worship can turn into withdrawal or blame. Every intense attraction, then, carries a hidden task: to remain awake within it, to see clearly while feeling deeply. A mature man learns that focus is not ownership, it is reverence. He can look at her with full presence without needing to control or consume. Jung described individuation as the process of making the unconscious conscious, and in this context, it means recognizing that desire is also dialogue with one's own soul. In long-term relationships, this principle becomes essential. Many women, especially after years of familiarity, complain that their partner's attention drifts, that he no longer looks at them the way he once did. But this fading of focus is not proof of lost love. It is often a symptom of psychic fatigue. When routine replaces curiosity, the unconscious no longer feels invited to participate. To revive focus, a couple must reawaken what Jung called eros, not merely physical affection, but the creative principle of relatedness. Eros is what keeps perception alive. It invites both partners to meet each other anew, rather than through the dull filters of memory. When a man rediscovers fascination, not with novelty, but with presence, his focus naturally returns. He begins to notice again the light on her skin, the rhythm of her breath, the small gestures that once enchanted him. His attention becomes meditation. If we ignore this truth, focus turns into fragmentation. The man, unable to sustain inner connection, starts seeking external stimulation. New faces, new fantasies, endless scrolling, shallow encounters that mimic aliveness. But every time he chases a new image, he moves further from the integration his soul actually seeks. The cure for boredom is not novelty, it is awareness. Focus, at its highest form, is sacred attention. It is the masculine capacity to hold the feminine presence without turning her into a goal. It's the still point where action pauses and begins. When a man learns to stay in that state, alert, grounded, and open, intimacy becomes not a pursuit, but a revelation. In that silence between two people, where eyes meet and the world disappears, something larger than either of them breathes through. That is not technique, it is transformation. And when that focus deepens, something new begins to stir. The tension between control and surrender. That is where we move next, into the second hidden sign of desire.
2.
Micro-tension. If focus is the moment his attention locks, then micro-tension is what happens the second after, when his body realizes it has been caught. His jaw tightens ever so slightly. His breath pauses mid-sentence. His shoulders square as if bracing against something unseen. To an untrained eye, these gestures are invisible, but women feel them. It is not in what he does, but in what he holds back. This is the second sign, the body's confession of an inner battle between control and surrender. Psychologists have long noted that the human body speaks long before the mind does. Dr. Paul Ekman, one of the pioneers in the study of microexpressions, discovered that subtle muscular movements often betray feelings we try to suppress. A man's clenched jaw, a shift in posture, a brief stillness, all of it signals the struggle between the social mask and the primal instinct. Jung called this the battle between persona and shadow. Ekman called it leakage. Both meant the same thing, that truth finds a way out. This micro-tension is not anger or anxiety, but energy in limbo, desire meeting restraint. The masculine psyche has been trained from boyhood to contain emotion. Do not show too much. Stay composed. Never lose control. Those lessons, repeated over decades, live inside his muscles. So even when his soul wants to reach out, his conditioning says, wait. The result is the visible stillness many women misread as indifference. But beneath that stillness is fire. Sigmund Freud might have called this moment a dance between the id and the superego, the instinctive drive pressing against the moral and social boundaries imposed by upbringing. But Jung, going deeper, saw it as the friction between two archetypal forces, eros, the desire to connect, and logos, the need to maintain order. Within that friction lies transformation. For the man, it is both agony and awakening. Imagine him in that moment, aware of her closeness, of her scent, her tone, the warmth of her presence. His conscious mind tells him to stay calm, to be rational, but his unconscious hums with a pulse older than thought. This is the edge where masculine energy tests itself, the tension between not giving it away and already having given everything. In somatic psychology, this moment is recognized as a point of embodied polarity, where the nervous system oscillates between sympathetic arousal, meaning fight, flight, or pursuit, and parasympathetic surrender, meaning rest, yield, or merge. The body literally cannot decide whether to move forward or hold still, and so it trembles inwardly. This is why the air between two people in attraction feels heavy and electric. The space itself becomes alive with the energy of what is unsaid. If you observe carefully, microtension is not confined to early attraction. It continues in subtler ways throughout long-term connection. Married couples experience it when one partner wants closeness and the other hesitates, when words stop, but the room feels full, when someone's breathing pattern shifts, revealing vulnerability the other isn't ready to see. These are moments where the unconscious body speaks louder than language. Ignoring this tension often leads to confusion and emotional distance. The woman senses it, the tightening, the hesitation, and interprets it as disinterest or withdrawal. The man feels it too, but cannot explain it without shame. He fears being seen as too eager, too emotional, too vulnerable. So both retreat into silence, each misreading the other's restraint. Jung might say this is how the shadow gains control, by thriving in what remains unspoken. The way out is awareness. The body does not lie, but it also does not demand. It invites. When both partners learn to notice tension without judgment, it becomes a portal rather than a wall. A man's held breath can be an invitation to safety, a reminder that he is standing on the edge of letting go. If the woman can sense that without fear and hold the space without forcing it, the tension dissolves naturally into connection. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio once wrote that emotion is not an obstacle to reason, but its foundation. The same truth applies here. Tension is not a flaw in attraction, but its necessary bridge. It marks the boundary between what is known and what is about to be revealed. Without that subtle resistance, intimacy would have no depth. So the next time you sense that stillness, that pause in his body, that sudden quiet between you, see it for what it is, not avoidance, but the trembling threshold of feeling. Beneath it lies something sacred, a man's lifelong training to stay in control, meeting his deepest instinct to surrender. The question, then, is this: when that quiet electricity fills the air, do you rush to fill it, or do you allow it to unfold?
3. Protective posture. There is a story, often recounted in Jung's collected notes, about a married man who came to him in quiet despair. The man was not unhappy in his marriage, nor unfaithful. He simply felt that something invisible had shifted. He told Jung that when he stood near his wife, he felt the urge to move closer, to stand between her and the world, to guard her from things that did not even threaten her. He could not explain it. It is not jealousy, he said. It is something softer, like I want her to feel safe even from the air itself. Jung listened carefully, as he often did, not rushing to interpret. After a long silence, he said, "That is the natural gesture of Eros when it begins to deepen. What you describe is not possession, but participation. Your body has begun to speak for the part of your soul that wishes to protect what it fears to lose." This moment captures what we call the third sign, protective posture. It is the shift from physical attraction to emotional craving. A man's body subtly angles toward the woman, often placing itself between her and the surrounding space. He may step closer when others approach, or position his body so that her comfort becomes the quiet center of his awareness. His movements become slower, more intentional. His energy, once restless, now steadies. This is not dominance, it is instinct, older than speech. Evolutionary psychology calls it mate guarding, a remnant of our ancestral biology. But that description is only the surface. Beneath it lies something more soulful, the masculine archetype of the protector awakening. In Jungian thought, this impulse belongs to the archetype of the warrior, tempered by the lover. It is not about control, but about service. The body becomes a boundary through which affection expresses itself as safety. Modern research in attachment theory adds another layer to this. According to Dr. Sue Johnson, founder of emotionally focused therapy, secure attachment triggers protective responses that are not about ownership, but about attunement. When a man feels emotionally connected, his nervous system organizes itself to ensure the other's well-being. He becomes calmer, more grounded, less impulsive. His body literally changes rhythm. The man from Jung's story eventually realized that his protective instinct had less to do with his wife and more with his own integration of the inner feminine. He had spent years being rational, guarded, successful in business, but emotionally distant. When he finally began to love deeply, something in him softened.
and that softness frightened him. The act of protection was not only toward her, but toward the tenderness now awakening in himself. Jung told him, "You are protecting your own eros, not just hers." This insight reveals a profound psychological truth. When a man feels genuine connection, he becomes both guardian and student of that feeling. His posture changes because his energy changes. He is no longer trying to impress or conquer. He is preserving something sacred. This is why his movements become slower, steadier. The masculine energy, when in harmony, is not aggressive, but anchored. In daily life, this can be seen in small gestures. A man moving his chair slightly closer, placing his hand on her back in a crowded space, standing at her side when crossing a street. These are not acts of ownership, though they are often misunderstood as such in modern culture. They are the body's way of saying, "You are safe here." However, if this instinct is unconscious, it can twist into something darker. The need to protect can become a need to control. The archetype of the protector, if cut off from awareness, becomes the possessor. Jung warned of this danger, explaining that every archetype has a shadow. What begins as care can decay into domination when the ego tries to hold on to what the soul should only cherish. True protection never imprisons. It liberates. In therapy rooms today, this pattern still appears. Men speak of wanting their partners to feel secure, but beneath that wish lies fear. The fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear of losing the emotional ground they rarely admit needing. When the fear is seen and accepted, protection transforms into presence. When it is denied, it becomes controlled. The same instinct that shields love can also suffocate it. For women, understanding this distinction changes everything. When a man subtly places himself between you and a crowd or slows his walk to match yours, it is not always a strategy. It is his nervous system translating emotion into motion. In those moments, he is saying without words, "Your peace matters to me." In long relationships, this posture often fades, not because love is gone, but because awareness is. When two people stop recognizing the sacredness of small gestures, the body loses its instinct to protect. It goes back to being functional instead of relational. Reviving it does not require grand acts, only mindfulness. Noticing each other again, the way the man in Jung's story eventually did. He told Jung months later, "I learned that I cannot protect her from life, only from my own blindness." That sentence, simple and trembling, holds the essence of the third sign. The true masculine protector is not one who shields the other from the world, but one who becomes conscious enough not to harm through ignorance or neglect.
4. Heightened awareness. There is a stage in connection where attraction no longer feels like choice, but sensitivity. The man who once looked at her now begins to feel her, not in a romanticized sense, but in the literal chemistry of perception. He notices her perfume before she enters the room, the movement of her hair when light passes through it, the small gesture of her hand when she tucks it behind her ear. He hears the rhythm of her breathing even when no words are spoken. His senses heighten, as if tuned to a frequency that only she emits. Carl Jung would describe this as the moment when the unconscious becomes psychically attuned. The man's awareness, once gathered across the outer world, now gathers around one point of fascination. His entire sensory field narrows, and with it his emotional field deepens.
This is not obsession, but resonance. The psyche recognizing a pattern that mirrors something within itself. Jung called such experiences synchronicities of the soul, where an outer presence awakens an inner truth. Modern neuroscience echoes this phenomenon. Studies in interpersonal neurobiology show that when two people experience emotional attraction, their brain waves, heart rhythms, and breathing patterns begin to synchronize. Dr. Daniel Siegel calls this resonance circuitry, the biological foundation of empathy and attachment. What Jung described symbolically, science now measures physically. The man's heightened awareness is not fantasy. It is his nervous system aligning with another's presence. Jung observed that men and women process this stage differently. The masculine psyche, driven by logos, perceives love through focus and direction. The feminine psyche, guided by eros, perceives it through connection and flow. When a man's awareness heightens, it becomes linear. His attention locks onto her as though she were the axis of his reality. When a woman's awareness heightens, it expands. She feels him as part of a larger field of emotion, energy, and meaning. The same intensity, but mirrored opposites. One narrows, the other widens. This contrast often creates misunderstanding. She may interpret his fixation as possessiveness, while he experiences her spaciousness as emotional distance. Yet both are expressions of love, filtered through different psychic functions. Jung would say that the task of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, is to integrate these opposites. For the man, this means learning to expand his focus into empathy. For the woman, to ground her flow into clarity. A story from Jung's Zurich practice illustrates this perfectly. A woman once complained that her husband had become cold and withdrawn. "He used to notice every detail about me. Now he sees nothing," she said. Jung asked her to describe how she responded to his early attentiveness. She hesitated, then admitted, "I thought he was being dramatic, too intense." Jung smiled gently and said, "He was not dramatic, he was awakening. But because you did not meet his awareness with presence, his psyche retreated. When the anima is not met, the man's sensitivity turns to numbness." This is the hidden truth of heightened awareness. It is not permanent, and it is not guaranteed. It requires mutual consciousness to sustain. When the woman remains emotionally open, the man's sensitivity grows into devotion. But when she repeatedly invalidates it by mocking, ignoring, or doubting his attentiveness, his psyche begins to armor itself. The gift of sensitivity then becomes the wound of rejection. In relationships, this plays out silently. A man who once noticed her perfume stops noticing anything. A woman who once felt adored begins to feel invisible. The tragedy is that both think love has faded, when in reality, awareness has shut down under the weight of misunderstanding. Heightened awareness at its purest is the soul's language of attention. It is how love first speaks, not in declarations, but in noticing. To truly see another is to allow the psyche to breathe through the senses. And this kind of seeing requires courage, because it means surrendering the ego's detachment and stepping into vulnerability. When Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances, this was the reaction he meant: awareness igniting awareness. Perception, awakening, perception. The fusion is beautiful, but it can burn if one is not ready to receive it. So if a man notices every detail of your being, remember that he is not merely looking, he is listening with his entire body. And when you step back and he instinctively follows, it is not control, but connection, seeking safety. Perhaps the deeper question for both men and women is this: when awareness awakens, do we meet it with gratitude or with fear?
5. Stillness. At the deepest point of attraction, something unexpected happens. The man who once leaned forward and followed every detail begins to slow down, his breath deepens, his voice softens, his movements grow deliberate. What looks like composure from the outside is in fact surrender from within. This is stillness, the quiet center of genuine desire. True longing is not restless. It does not chase or demand. It steadies. When a man feels something profound, his energy gathers inward rather than scattering outward. His silence is not coldness, but reverence. Carl Jung often described this state through the archetype of the lover, the one who feels so deeply that he no longer needs to conquer or prove. He simply is. Love, Jung said, becomes the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. And once that bridge forms, the psyche naturally settles into calm. You can see this in small, ordinary moments. A man sits across from the woman who moves him. He stops thinking about what to say or how to act. He simply watches, listening with his whole being. His presence grows heavier, but not in tension, in peace. His silence becomes communication, a silent confession that says, "I feel this, and I am here." Science, too, recognizes this shift. When attraction deepens and feels emotionally safe, the body activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which slows breathing and releases oxytocin. The man's calm is not indifference, but physiology, his body opening into trust. Women often express desire through movement and openness, while men reveal it through grounding and quiet. Her energy expands, his energy steadies. Together, they form the natural polarity of connection. But there is a shadow to stillness. Some men mistake withdrawal for depth. They turn silent not from presence, but from fear. True stillness holds warmth. Avoidance feels cold. The difference lies in consciousness. Jung warned that when the masculine ego refuses to feel, it retreats behind a false calm that isolates rather than protects. The mature man, by contrast, can be silent without closing off. His quiet radiates safety, not distance. In long relationships, this stillness often marks the transition from passion to devotion. The fire burns slower, but it burns clean. When a woman senses this calm in her partner, she feels grounded, not restrained. It is the kind of peace that says, "You can rest here." Stillness is the highest form of desire because it no longer seeks to possess. It simply recognizes. It is the moment when love stops asking to be returned and begins to exist as a presence itself. Jung would say that this is where consciousness and soul finally meet, where longing becomes peace. And perhaps that is the true measure of love, not how loud it burns, but how quietly it endures.
When we look closely at these 5 signs, focus, micro-tension, protective posture, heightened awareness, and stillness, we begin to see that what men experience in intimacy is not random behavior, but a language of the soul. Each gesture, Each silence, each subtle shift of breath reveals the ongoing dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. Beneath every glance or pause lies the same question: can I be seen and still be safe? Carl Jung believed that every encounter between man and woman is an encounter between two inner worlds. What we call attraction is, in truth, a meeting between shadows and light, between our hidden fears and our deepest longings. The masculine energy seeks grounding through presence. The feminine seeks expansion through connection. When both awaken together, the body becomes the vessel through which the soul learns to love without fear. If this reflection spoke to you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Jungian Mind Shift. Here, we explore the unseen layers of human connection and the quiet wisdom hidden within the heart. Finally, stay curious, stay gentle, and keep listening to the language beneath your own silence.